and also the chairperson, and my order might not be correct, but
on my side, the presentation is on.
Yes, DG, we can see it. The slide that is showing is international experience. And I think DG was just trying to explain to the House what the international experience is that we've drawn from. We have done quite extensive research. I don't think DG in the slide has covered everything of who we have consulted. We've looked at countries in the Northern Hemisphere. We've looked at countries in Africa. And we've tried to follow what they were doing in terms of how they were experiencing COVID and what the best practice or the lessons that we could draw from in terms of how they did some things. The slide just shows you some of what they are doing in Sweden, in UK, in England. If we can move on to the next slide. In these countries, they never really had social distancing like we have had. So the slide speaks to attendance. If we can move on to the next slide. And I think DG was just trying to explain. So on attendance, the slide focuses on grade 7 and grade 12, looking at the teachers and learners and what the attendance rate has been. And you can see that the attendance rate started out on a lower percentage, and in some of the bigger provinces, the attendance rate was lower than in others. Limpopo has got 4 grades. So I'm just picking on the big provinces. So Limpopo has got you can see they had quite a good attendance of grade 7 and grade 12 learners that had come. And they had put in place a lot of measures to try and ensure that the learners come back, drawing on the QLTC program, strengthening the QLTC structures within the provinces, and going out of their way, all the provinces did, to try and ensure that the parents are aware that the schools are opening, when they're opening, the dates and so on, and to bring them back into the schooling environment. And they also utilize the broadcast, the radio and so on, to get the message across of the schools reopening. If we can move to the next slide. So this slide speaks to the projected learner dropout. Now it goes with the previous slide we were speaking about. So you will see from those slides that there was not anyone that was on 100% for grade 7 and grade 12 learners. And so what the an explanation that the parent has chosen to keep the learner at home because of anxiety, or that the learner has a comorbidity. And these become then potential dropout rates in the system that they have been looking at, and you can see that they've identified the numbers on the slides. And they have not only identified the numbers, but they've also looked at measures to put in place to follow up with these learners and the parents to try and get them to come back. If we can move on to the next slide. So these are all the learners that have been exempted from school attendance, and you'll see that there are various categories here. So there are those learners who have comorbidities, and then there are those learners who have got ill health other than the comorbidity. And then there are those learners who are at home, like I said, because of fear and anxiety. Then there are those parents who have chosen to keep the learners to do virtual online learning, what the province is called lockdown learning. And then there are also those learners who are doing the homeschooling, or they have appointed a service provider to do the virtual online learning. And the numbers of the provinces, they reflect the different categories of learners as identified areas. If we move to the next slide. So the slide speaks to learners exempted from school attendance. In the category of those who have comorbidities who are at home with ill health.
You can release today.
Excuse me, can we ask the chairperson to mute his mic so that we are able to hear or listen to the presentation, please?
Can I continue? So this slide speaks to the various options that we have on supporting the learners. Like I've indicated, there's a lot of material that we have available in provinces. It is looking at video recordings that we have. It's looking at online learning through various apps that are available. Looking at emailing like we are having this meeting, Teams and Zoom opportunities that learners can use. And then there's also various materials that we have had from the past that is in a form of either printed or video recordings or a broadcast format. And this has also been made available to learners in terms of how we can support them. There's also the learning materials in terms of worksheets that have been made available. So there are various options that have been utilized, and the provinces have not had a uniform approach in terms of how they supported the learners. In some instances, they have a very strong online option, like in Gauteng, where the learners are more they on the rollout of, and in Eastern Cape as well, the rollout of the devices to learners is a lot higher than in other provinces, so they have then utilized the online options. Whereas those provinces who haven't got those opportunities available have taken other options. So all in all, there's been just a lot of work there to try and support the learners. And also we have now in this week launched Woza Matric, which is also looking at how to utilize broadcasting opportunities for learners to have access in terms of the TV. We have a dedicated time that we got from SABC TV to be able to provide 4 hours during school time and then another 4 hours afterwards that provides opportunity for interventions for especially the matric pupils to have access to learning materials to help them for the matric exams. If we move on to the next slide. So this slide looks at the readiness of back to school on the 31st of August. Our first slot came in on the 24th of August. The second group came in on the 31st of August. And we track the readiness all the time of provinces to receive the learners. This just gives you the number of learners that will be returning on the 31st of August. It also gives you the special schools. Gives you the indication of the readiness of the facilities. The biggest challenges in most of the areas had been issues around access to water and to ablution facilities, and then the extent to which we have tried to overcome those problems. And then this information we'll pick up again in a more detailed way later on in this presentation. And then there's readiness in terms of the teachers. So the teachers also had to identify if they had comorbidities, if they were unable to come back to school for whatever their reasons, but mainly that because of COVID they had comorbidities and it would put them at high risk. And then the provinces had to have the numbers to know how many teachers had comorbidities, how many substitute teachers were then required or assistant teachers were required in terms of their numbers on the comorbidities. Also on comorbidities, we'll pick up that information again later. And then the provinces had to also appoint cleaners and screeners, and this just gives you the numbers per province in terms of what they have appointed. These are the people that ensure that they help us with maintaining the protocols of COVID, to ensure that every person that comes onto the school premises, whether it's a teacher or a learner or a parent, they are screened, and that the classrooms are also cleaned to ensure that we abide by the protocols of maintaining good hygiene for COVID. COVID to prevent infection rate, increased infection rate of COVID. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Next slide, please, Mataoli. So this then speaks to the water supply issues. Like I had indicated earlier on, this is giving you the identified problems of the numbers that we per province had. So the schools that requested assistance in terms of water supply, the number of tanks that was installed, the number of tanks that were filled with water, the water tanks that were without water, the tanks that were on permanent stands, the tanks that were on temporary stands, what the frequency for filling of water is in terms of the requirements, what the complaints were from the schools, and what the measures were put in place to deal with the complaints. Now, in terms of how we dealt with the water supply issue and how we dealt with tracking, whether this was sorted out in communities, we have a daily 6 o'clock meeting to ensure that these measures are tracked, that we understand how far they have gotten in terms of those schools that required assistance and the extent to which the deliveries have happened.
Excuse me a bit. Excuse me, ma'am. May you maybe increase the volume on your phone or raise your voice a little bit? It's really difficult to follow. If I didn't have the presentation, it was going to be very difficult to follow.
Okay, thank you,
Just
Chairperson.
increase the volume on your phone and or raise your voice a bit, if that is possible.
Is this better, Chairperson? Can you hear me better now? Can I continue, Chairperson?
My reception is failing me also.
Okay, I hope I'm more audible to others. I have tried to increase the volume, and I am sitting in the office. Our reception is not very good in the office, but I will try my level best to be audible. So this is about the emergency sanitation, like I've indicated, the schools that requested assistance, the number of sanitation units that were required, the frequency of the service, the replaced sanitation units, the complaints from schools, and the measures to deal with the complaints. And we reflect the numbers per province and the extent to which we have tried to eradicate these problems. If we can move on to the next slide, dealing with the curriculum issues. In terms of the curriculum assessment, we needed to ensure that there is sufficient curriculum coverage. These are the learners that will be writing the exams in the next 2 months. And we give an indication there of the measures to support the grade 12 learners in the curriculum coverage. We also give an indication of the extent to which we have done online preparations, broadcast and online or virtual support programs, as well as support initiatives to the grade 12 learners, including the learners with the special needs. We give indication of the extent to which we've done preparation for this. So the schools all put together a plan in terms of in each province in terms of how they were going to deal with the measures to support the grade 12 learners and the extent to which they were going to put in place interventions to cover the curriculum other than the classroom teaching that was happening. You will know that the grade 12s have been back at school since June. They were the first group, the grade 12s and the grade 7s, to come back in June, on the 8th of June. And also, they only had a 1-week break when the president had the second closure. And so we have tried very much to maintain, supporting them besides of the normal classroom teaching that they've had quite regularly. So the way in which this was done is through various, like I said, online programs of digital resources that we provided, worksheets, pay setters, looking at having radio broadcasts, tutorial materials, worksheet materials, exemplar questionnaires, giving them memorandums to go through of past papers, looking at how to mediate the annual teaching plans and to provide assistance in terms of that, looking at the extent to which we looked at a revision program. We have got a reading app that provides some assistance in some provinces. there's audio lessons, there's like I said, online lessons that are broadcasted on the TV, and in particular, this WOZA Matric is that has gone live from the 1st of September. That is in particular a focused attention to assist the matriculants. Beside of what the provinces have been doing, there's Hey Maths. The problem is that normally we used to have the learner camps, but because of COVID, it was very difficult. And so what provinces are now trying to do is to explore all the other options. Of course, those who have the devices also use Teams meetings to have extra revision classes and interaction with the learners. So all in all, we've really tried every possible aspect, and we've had many partners who have come and volunteered to assist us in terms of how we could navigate and provide intervention and support to the matriculants. This is extended to other grades as well, but our focus is to ensure that this year's matriculants are not necessarily lost in the system. If we can move on to the next slide, please. This is giving you very much the same story, but it's around grade R to 11. And like I said, in the case of the matriculants, they have to write the exam. So we have tried to cover the whole of the curriculum that they had to cover. And whereas with the curriculum for the grade R to 11, what we've done there is we have trimmed the curriculum. We have revised what it is that they have to cover. And we have worked out a plan in which we are going to play catch up in the next year or two, depending on the extent to which there was we didn't cover certain aspects of the curriculum. So that is the plan there. But we have also got, in the same way, we have got online programs, we have got online teaching, we have got printed hard copies of learning material that we are providing to these learners. And we have got radio broadcasts, and we've got a WhatsApp app that provides information. And so in much the same way we are trying to support the matrics, we are also doing that for grade R to 11. In this instance, because of the social distancing, which we will talk to later, you will see that the timetable, the curriculum timetable for the schools for grade R to 11 had to be revised, and a lot of them are following what we call a rotational program. For those of you who are parents, you will know that the learners over a 2-week period, most provinces chose over a 2-week period to teach the learners at least 5 days. So what happens is you come to school for 2 days in 1 week, the next week you come for 3 days, and then they rotate like that, so that all the learners can have an opportunity to cover the same curriculum, so that there's some fairness in how it's spread out. So that's what we've done around curriculum coverage. If we move on to the next slide, please. This is looking at the assessment and the examinations. So this just gives you the number of who are registered for the NSC, the number of exam centers, the number of markers, the number of marking centers. This is in respect of how we are progressing in preparation for the examinations. We are in an advanced stage in terms of that. I've already explained that we've done a lot with the support of learners, but also around the preparation work, you can see that everything is in order to ensure that the examinations are conducted in a way that maintains the integrity of the examination. The information on circulars and location and what exactly needs to happen around preparation has all been sent out to provinces, and these slides should speak to that information around the extent to which that has been made known in provinces. If we can move on to the next slide. So this slide is talking to the standard operating procedures. Now this slide is quite critical because in terms of the protocols for COVID, this is what we can refer to as our Bible around the COVID essential protocols, and it gives you information about exactly what it is that needs to happen within schools, how you must conduct yourself when you arrive at the school, what is the screening process, what is the way in which the learners need to conduct themselves what is the issues around social distancing. You will see there have been lots of photos and media coverage around the extent to which schools are practicing social distancing. There are markings, like wherever we go in the shopping center, there's markings of where you must stand. In the same way, the schools have done that. You're not allowed to get into the school without a mask. No entry without a mask. The learners have all been provided with the masks, and the procedures that need to be followed in terms of when there is an infection, who you must involve in terms of the Department of Health, exactly what needs to happen around decontamination at the school. All of these things are provided for in the standard operating procedures. It has been amended from our side to ensure that it takes on the revised directions that came in terms of reducing the number of days from 14 to 10 days of being in isolation. But this is our document that then informs the schools. The schools have all been trained, the teachers, the learners, everyone that is involved in the schooling community has undergone orientation in terms of the standard operating procedures. And if any changes come going forward on how to revise the standard operating procedures based on change directives, then the standard operating procedures get amended based on that. If we can move on to the next slide, please. The next slide, please, Matauli.
I'm in the next slide, Ms. Gaya. Psychosocial support.
Now, mine is still showing the standard operating procedures on my side. Okay, there I have psychosocial support. So psychosocial support is an intervention that we put in place to help in the COVID crisis. You will know that during the COVID crisis, we are challenged with many things in our schooling communities. Mainly that there's a lot of anxiety, but also there's a lot of support that is required based on how to cope with losing a loved one, a family member, or a member within the schooling community, whether it's a learner or a teacher. And so what we've done here is to have relationships with the Department of Social Development as well as with the Department of Health. And the social workers have come into the schools to assist us in terms of how they would provide the support based on what is needed for counseling. And psychologists and social workers are available to do that. In some instances, provinces have even identified vacancies that they had to actually have their own people that are appointed as more psychologists and social workers that could assist the schools. This just shows you how we mark the school grounds. There are some photos as well that follow that reflect that. You can see in the staff room, the teachers, where they can sit, the markings are there. And I've already explained about the monitoring of the social distancing. So we try as far as possible to ensure that there's a 1.5 meter social distance, even although in our engagements with the Department of Health and as well as with the experts on the topic of COVID essentials, and also in our engagements with what happens in other countries, not in every case do they follow the 1.5. Some people say that you can have 1 meter as well, but we try as far as possible. It was easier when we had grade 7 and grade 12s there because it was fewer learners. Now that there are more learners, it needs to be more tightly monitored to ensure that everything is in order. Largely, the pictures, the photos that we have displayed there show you how we have gone about it. Every school have a procedure in the morning before the learners come in terms of how the temperatures are taken, checking through asking them questions around whether they have been in contact with anyone that has COVID or whether they are showing any symptoms. But also they in the way in which they come into the school, it's to check whether you have your mask on and whether we sanitize the hands. So that it's a ritual, and in the same way we all in buildings have to undergo procedure every day. That's what's happening in the schools. The way they do it is that the learners have got different times and sometimes different gates that they have to come into, just to help to manage the social distancing within the schools. If we move on to the next slide, please. Matauli, please move on to the next slide.
Monitoring of the use of masks, DDG.
Okay,
that slide.
that one I can't see. I can't see it yet on the screen, but with the masks, what we are doing is we are also monitoring in the same way we monitor social distancing, we monitor the masks. You may not enter the school premises without a mask. Should there be a learner who arrives at school without a mask, the learner is either provided with a mask or the learner is isolated in a place where the learner can wait until the parent can bring a mask to the learner. So that's how the monitoring of masks happens. Also looking at how we procure the masks. So they are, initially we had to check the quality and ensure that the masks are compliant with the standards, and so we also follow and try to get reports from provinces on that. On litigation, we have had several litigations on the various challenges that came our way, and in all of it, DG always is very proudly informing our platforms that we speak to that we have been successful in all the litigations against us around whether to open the schools or not. And the only one that we lost was the one that related to the nutrition program at the schools, and that one we were up against balancing the right to have a meal versus our challenges in terms of providing it. I think that was that we didn't win. If we move on from litigation, I won't spend a lot of time on that. There's a lot of the slides just give you the details of each of the cases and the challenge that we take into account. So this shows you the nutrition, examples of what's happening with nutrition that is served in the range to the learners. The nutrition program is looking at, we are indicating here on the side the number of learners who are benefiting from it, the number of schools that participate, the number of learners who are still at home, and then those who are receiving parcels, what are the challenges in terms of the provision of a nutrition program in the current circumstances, especially when the schools weren't opened, that there was a low turnout, or you had sometimes that learners, depends on what the meal was for the day. Certain meals had greater numbers turn up than other meals, and then now we try to mitigate all of this by getting messages out to the community around advocacy that learners and families could collect food from the school, that they were contacted via SMSs to parents and WhatsApp to try and inform them that they could receive a meal at school. So the information in the slide just speaks to all of that. If we move on to the next slide, please. Mataoli, can you move on to the next slide, please?
Yes, DDG, scholar transport.
Okay, so I can't see it on the screen here yet, but the scholar transport is also something that we had to ensure that we put in place measures that complied with the COVID protocols in terms of the scholar transport. There we had to ensure that no one is on the bus without a mask, that there's regular sanitizing, that they kept social distancing within the scholar transport that is provided. And we worked with the Department of Transport here. Each province is just giving you the indication of exactly what the circumstances are in their province around that. It didn't come without its problems because the drivers of the buses, when you have a reduced load, they get paid according to the numbers they transport. And so we had to meet with the provinces had to meet with the Department of Transport to see how best to manage and mitigate this and put on extra routes and try to help in the maintaining of the social distancing. And I think from where we're sitting now, we have moved past those problems around scholar transport, because the provinces have put in place the measures now to ensure that that goes well. This is just giving you information here on the teachers with the comorbidities. I spoke to that earlier as well. There's a collective agreement in the ELRC that explains exactly how to manage issues around COVID and those teachers who have comorbidities. And this gives you the number of concessions that were granted. Teachers had to apply. It wasn't just automatic. You had to send in information from your doctor to indicate what exactly the circumstances are around your health conditions. And based on that, they were then either granted the concession or the concession was turned down. And where there was a concession granted, you had to have a replacement. And you can see that the numbers of replacements are indicated there. In some instances, they are in a far advanced stage of providing replacements. In other cases, they are still trying to get the replacements in the classes. Where the numbers are low, it's not necessarily that they are awaiting a replacement. The provinces, in how they looked at, also looked at a number of excess teachers that they had and how they could use them. They looked at Funza Lushaka graduates and how they could use them. They looked on the unemployed teachers database and utilized from there. And so in all of these ways, they found ways to find replacement teachers to support the schools. We can move on to the next slide. Matoli, if you can tell me what the slide is, because it's not showing on my screen. Okay, SGB posts. So thank you, Matoli. So yeah, we are just reflecting on the SGB paid posts in public schools. In the majority of quintile 4 and 5 schools that have got fee paying, they have historically appointed from the money that they collect from fees. They appoint additional teachers to try and bring down the pupil-teacher ratio and keep the classes lower, the class pupil-teacher ratio lower, and that helps to manage in a more, to have smaller classes with the educational philosophy that the smaller class provides a better managed class and more quality teaching in terms of how you get information across and how you mitigate that. But what COVID has done is that it has created some difficulties. And so this tells you the number of teachers that are in the public schools, but it also indicates the number of teachers that they had to let go because the parents were not paying the school fees. Those are the challenges, and that they had to reduce the salaries of the teachers, and that the schools had to see how to manage, the problem, and they were looking at a request to pay from the school funding norms allocation and have that paid out earlier. So it is a challenge in relation to this SGB post. Then the information around the total number of COVID cases since the lockdown. This just tells you information about the number of educators that have been confirmed with COVID, the number of non-teaching staff, and the number of learners. We move on to the next slide, please. This gives you the indication of the fatalities since the lockdown, and it gives a breakdown again of educators, of non-teaching staff, and of learners, so that you see the number of learners is very low in keeping with what the science experts have indicated. Only 4 learners have passed away. Then on deviations, so what needs to happen is if a school is not able to open on the time that they were supposed to, on the dates that have been indicated in our directions, or if the school deviated and came back earlier. It wasn't just something that you could do on your own. You had to receive permission to do that. And the slide speaks to that in terms of the number of schools that requested deviations, the grades that have been identified which require deviations. And in some instances, it was because of vandalism, and it was because of problems of water supply and sanitation that initially the requests were that they open a week later. And as the time went by, the deviations were in the second round of the lockdown, the deviations were requests to ask that they come back earlier. In the instances where schools had they were small schools and they had sufficient space and was able to manage the social distancing to allow for all the grades or certain grades more than what the required number was that came in. And this had to be done to the MEC, and this just gives you an indication of which grades would the MEC apply for to the minister, and whether the MEC has met the requirements as stipulated in the directions on the procedures of how to actually get the deviation permission from the minister. And you can see that it's not in every province that there were deviations happened around deviations than those that required deviations. Where they have, we've indicated it in the slide. If we move on to the next slide. This is about the differentiated timetable, which I have spoken to earlier. This just gives you the number of options of differentiated timetabling. So some schools have done platooning in terms of running 2 shifts of school with different grades or different same grades coming at different times, one in a morning session, one in an afternoon session. Then there's those who have got a number of schools that have alternate weeks, as I've explained, over a 2-week period. You 1 week you come, 1 week you don't come, and in a month everyone has a turn to come. And then there are those who opted for alternate days, which is over a 2-week period you at least have 5 days of schooling, either 2 days in 1 week, 3 days in another week, but in over a 2-week period all the learners in the school have had an opportunity to have schooling. And then there's others that opted for a hybrid model, which is a combination of these choices, and it gives you the figures there. If we move on to the next slide, please, Mataoli. So this is about hostels from the slide, I can see. So the hostel facilities is another challenge that we had to monitor very tightly to ensure that it doesn't become a hotspot in terms of infections. And so we have recorded the number of hostels that are in the province, exactly what the facilities are, and exactly how they are going to manage the social distancing. And you can see that the measures that were put in place to address the challenges in the hostels, they put in place, for instance, that if learners if they're following the bi-weekly timetable, so they take turns. When it's one group that is their turn to come in on that hybrid model or the alternate weeks model, then those are the learners that then sleep in the hostel, alternate, and then they go home, and then the next lot come. And in the same way, they had to make the arrangements on how they eat. They eat in smaller groups in the dining halls to maintain social distancing. They've also put arrangements of how in the dormitory, in the rooms, they have kept the beds apart, 1.5 meters apart. They put the wardrobe now in between the beds, so you will see some photos of that as well as evidence of how they've managed it. But it has taken a lot of planning and a lot of monitoring on our side to ensure, and the PED side, to ensure that the hostels do not become hotspots. And of course, it has a knock-on effect on the transport arrangements. And in some instances, they've even had schools neighboring schools that have accommodated and assisted them, so that there are no problems on the hostel facilities. If we move on to the next slide, please, Wally. Next slide, please.
Disruptions.
Disruptions. Okay. So this slide is talking to, initially there were some planned disruptions that we experienced in provinces. COSAS was moving around to try and close schools based on the concerns that they had around infection rates being increased and spread, as well as some community members who were wanting to close the schools. This was largely due to misinformation that was there, that parents didn't understand that they actually had choices that they could make around keeping their children at home if they had anxiety and fear. And so that informed it required us to do some work with those organizations and communities, which we did, and it settled. As well as other disruptions was around a lot of vandalism and break-ins that also then made it difficult for us to proceed with the schooling in the way in which we had anticipated. We had involved various community structures, which included SAPs, it included the community police forums, it involved the quality teaching and learning structures within provinces. It also required for us to, look at whether in a worst case scenario we needed to bring about an interdict against certain individuals or organization that was deliberately preventing learning from happening in the schools. But fortunately, there are not many organized disruptions that continue now. It has settled, and also we have managed to, on the issues of break-ins and vandalism with the schools opening, it appears as if the numbers drop, that the actual presence in a school limits the number of break-ins that happen at schools. Then the slide is talking to quality education. I think we're talking to the QLTC structures here. So our QLTC program, so QLTC is a quality learning and teaching program that we have in the department, and the intention of this program is that it needs to be established at all levels in the province and in the district and at schools. And up until now, it has always been a fairly weak structure at lower levels, like in the schools and in the districts. They haven't always been very well established. So during the COVID period, we have been on a drive to encourage the provinces to establish the structures and to ensure that they are functional, because the QLTC structure is the one that will be able to mitigate a lot of the problems that we experience with communities. They're able to assist by providing information, having campaign drives, information drives, advocacy programs within the communities. And the slide just speaks to the extent to which they have established that and what is the progress that provinces are making, where they are strong and where there are still areas of weakness that needs to be established. And you can see from the information here that even here there's a lot more parent participation in terms of strengthening the structures and looking at what are the issues that emanate in relation to COVID, and how to provide the information as well as the actual COVID essentials, if that is the case that is required, or if it's learner absenteeism, how to manage that. So, it seems like the QRTC programs are assisting us in terms of also disseminating information into communities, and we encourage provinces to continue on this drive. Next slide, please. So this slide speaks to the COVID essentials around the procurement. The first one is about vandalized schools. So that just shows you all the things that we had provided to schools. It's about disinfectants. It's about the sanitizers and the masks and the aprons for those who have to clean. So procurement was done in the provinces, and like I indicated, they had to get cloth masks for the learners, and they had to have enough sanitizer and enough disinfectants to ensure that they were able to practice the protocols within schools. The provinces ordered in some instances enough for 3 months, and in some instances there are even examples of where they had ordered up to 6 months. What they did was they had stocked and stored the COVID essentials in a safe place in the province, and then they had what I call just-in-time deliveries of stock to school, so that as we increase the number of learners who attended, so the amount of stock of the COVID essentials that had to be delivered to the schools was provided. This was to ensure that we limited the number of burglaries to steal the COVID essentials from the schools, and that we would then have to be in a difficult position to have to resupply. And so there was a very tight schedule and program that was followed, and that slide gives you the information of that. This procurement of COVID essential slide further is talking to the number of masks that were returned to the suppliers because it was poor quality, and what the value of the returned masks were, and how many schools experienced shortage of masks for the new grades. And you can see that it largely there are very few provinces that actually reflect numbers where such problems occurred. But in KZN and Limpopo and Mpumalanga, we reflect the figures there and exactly how we had mitigated that in terms of what the value was and additional masks that had to be delivered. The next slide, please. So this slide is still a continuation of the COVID-19 essentials, and this just tells you the measures in place to ensure that schools don't run out of the COVID essentials. Like I've indicated, they had ordered ahead of time on the stock, and they had followed a clear procurement process, and they informed us, we tracked it and monitored it from the side of DBE. And then now they have to look at the plans in place for how they will do the top-ups and order the additional shortages or the additional COVID essentials going forward. The special schools are the ones that had to receive special equipment by the nature of the learners at the school. So you can see that there's a slide that speaks to that around what exactly were the materials that we had to order for the special schools. But all in all, I think with the thermometers and the sanitizers, initially there were problems with the thermometers, but people quickly understood that it wasn't that the thermometers were faulty, but it was that they were out in the cold, and so the readings were very low. And then when you go into a more neutral space where you take the temperatures, it shows up and more reliably on the temperatures. So I think we have overcome the worst of these problems that we had experienced initially. This is just a continuation. This is about the interim audit that is there. You will know that there are set protocols that have to be followed in terms of how we follow and manage the procurement processes. And this tells you exactly how we use the data of EMIS to as well as just tracking proper data recording for the procurement processes. And we had to look at dealing with the deficiencies in quality, and the explanation notes are there in terms of what the specific issues were per province, and then the guidelines for the districts and the schools to verify the quality of the product that have been received. That is a very important part of it, because if they don't provide that information, we will not necessarily be able to track and do a proper audit on whether there's value for money that in terms of the procurement that has been received. There are processes that are in place currently that still follow this audit, and to ensure that the COVID essentials that were procured followed proper procedures, and that there was value for money in terms of what was received, and that it was didn't get lost on the way, or that the quality was poor, so on. If we can move to the next slide, please. I think this is the last slide that gives you the conclusion of a very long presentation. I apologize if I took longer than DG normally does. He's obviously got more experience in getting through the slide in record time. But thank you very much, members.
Thank you very much. Are there some additions that members that your team would like to add? DG, are you with us? DG, are you still connected?
I am connected, Chair. I am connected, looking for a suitable place. I'm driving around, but I am connected.
I hear you very loud and clear.
Yeah, I'm driving around looking for the right spot, but I am connected, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Are there additions, things that would like to add?
Not at all, not at all. That's a very comprehensive presentation which covers the large spectrum which the committee requested that we should cover, and I don't have anything additional to add, Chair. I think Mrs. Geyer did very well under the circumstances. She did exceptionally well. Thank you.
No, thanks you. You've got a team, a good team with you. The honorable members, here's the presentation. This presentation actually, it's a response to issues raised by us in the last meetings. And it's not only us, it also covers issues that were raised by members in the National Assembly. I guess so, because when issues are raised and they're answered, so they really improve on the document, the presentation. Thank you very much. Honorable members, yeah, we may engage.
Sorry, Chair, Nolutando.
Yes.
Nolutando. There's another presentation, Chair, that still needs to be done by the department, the one on school calendar.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm saying that if members to do that, we can do that, or we can take all the presentations at once. Yeah, yes, sir.
Yes, Chair. I was suggesting that we take all the presentations so that when you ask questions, you just want to ask it once. Thank you.
Hey, DG, over to you. Let's get all the presentations.
Thank you, Chair.
The amended school calendar 2020.
It will be done by Mrs. Geyer. It's much shorter. Should take about 10 to 15 minutes for her to cover.
Okay.
I see it on the screen already. It's much shorter, Chair.
Yeah, we have the document, DG. You can take us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, honorable members. So unfortunately, you have to listen to me again. I will try to skip the presentation outline and also to skip the background and just try and go through it quickly. So we all know that the president made the announcement in March, towards the end of March, I think it was 18th of March, that the schools were closed, and that had an effect on the published 2020 school calendar, and we had to change it, we had to amend it. And so as a result of 2 lockdowns of the schools, we have 2 amendments to the calendar. And the first amendment then looked at how can we play catch up and recover the school days that were lost. And in the first amendment of the school calendar, we were able to do that very well. There were 173 school days that we were able to provide in that calendar. And the way in which it was done was the 1st to the 5th of June. The schools opened for the teachers to come back and to prepare for the learners, to ensure that the social distancing was done, that the sanitizers and the masks and the disinfectants was received. And then the learners came back on the 8th of June. And this calendar was in total, like I say, there were 173 days for the learners and 180 days for the teachers. But unfortunately, we had to close the schools down again for the month of July. And so we had to then change the school calendar again. So we had a second amendment. If we move on to the next slide. And that is that second amendment um, was from the 27th of July until the 24th of August. But in that announcement that the president made, the grade 12 learners came back to school after only 1 week of a break. They came back on the 3rd of August, and the grade 7 learners came back after a 2 week break, and they were back on the 11th of August. So the grade 7 and the grade 12 teachers and learners were back during that time and have been learning in schools since then. The 24th of August saw the remainder of the learners come back in large numbers, except for a small group that came back on the 31st of August. And we indicate the grades there that came back on the 24th of August. And the last group came in on the 31st of August, which was on Monday. Now, we then had to amend the school calendar based on that. And what we then did here, we can move on to the next slide. It looked at how do you now have to create like catch up and create the number of days by slightly extending the school calendar. And what we indicated in the amended school calendar was that the schools will then close on the 15th of December. So the schools open on the 24th of August. That was the start of the third term. And the schools close on the 15th of December. That was now the end of the fourth term. And in between, we had to create another holiday that separated the third term from the fourth term, which we did. And we provided a 1 week holiday year, which is from the 26th of October to the 30th of October. And in doing that, the amendment to the school calendar has 156 actual school days for learners and 163 school days for teachers, and that is 16 weeks that include the third and the fourth term. Now, if we move on to the next slide, it just shows you how the holidays go and how many days of schooling we had for the year. We move on to the next slide. It has also an effect on the examinations, and here we are just indicating what the arrangements would be. So the examinations will be concluded by the 15th of December for grade R to 11. They will be doing the revised annual teaching plans, which we spoke to in the previous presentation. And all the learners would receive their report cards on the 15th of December, which will indicate whether they will progress to the next year or whether they need to be retained in the grade. And this is done according to the revised and trimmed curriculum that we have explained in the previous presentation. The grade 12s will also be writing. They will be writing up until the 15th of December, and they will start the examination from the 5th of November. And these dates just give you the dates of how the examination for grade 12s will be going. So they write exams from the 5th to the 15th of December. Then not to compromise anything on the integrity of the examinations, the marking will only start in January the 4th. The reason is if you started any earlier, you would have to have a break on Christmas, and that would maybe compromise the integrity. So marking then will only start in January the 4th until the 22nd of January. The Umalusi standardization process will be on the 2nd of February. Ministerial announcement on the results will be on the 22nd of February, and the provinces will release the results on the 23rd of February. This process an impact on the 2021 calendar, because they would have started the published 2021 calendar would have started on the 11th of January. So what we now are in the process of doing is consulting stakeholders to amend the 2021 calendar, and the suggested date is that we start on the 25th of January with the academic year. In this way, we will not have an overlap between the 2021-2020 academic year. We will conclude that with its entirety on examination processes, and then we start the 2021 academic year on the 25th of January. If we do that and stakeholders support us, then we would have to only catch up 10 days of additional time for the 2021 calendar. And we have suggested in the proposal of the consultations that we reduce the school holidays in June by 1 week, and in April by 1 week. That's how we will get the additional 10 days. That's the end of the presentation, and thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you. I'm done, Chairperson.
Thank you. Just went to the bathroom. Thanks a lot. Honorable members, here's the presentation. We've already raised most of our concerns, unless if there's something else that need to be reported upon before we get engaged. DG, is there something that is left out?
Nothing from our side, Chair. Thank you very much. Nothing from our side. We can hear from honorable members if there are issues that they would want us to address or clarify or respond to in the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now there is what do somebody refer to as the basic question when it comes to COVID and departments, or were the funds that were intended for COVID purposes, were they used for COVID purposes? Can you assure us that all procedures, procurement were followed and that there is no nyaolemfene anywhere? Over to honorable members, we may engage with the discussion, with the input.
I have a question, Chairperson. It's Dalmain speaking, Dalmain Christians.
Can we just ask Osnol Tanda to help me with the
Getty? Chair? Anybody?
Honorable
Dongeni.
Honorable Dongeni, it would help if videos could be switched.
Oops, I'm back again.
Sometimes, yeah, switch off the